The wind carried dust across the Nevada desert, rolling in thin veils that shimmered beneath the morning sun. The training range stretched endlessly, dotted with steel silhouettes bolted into the earth at intervals, stretching well past what most marksmen would consider practical. Heat shimmered above the horizon, warping the targets until they appeared to sway like distant shadows. From his elevated position on the observation tower, Commander Jack Halvorsen steadied the long, matte black Barrett M107A1 across the sandbag rest. The rifle was not for firing today. It was a tool of magnification, of scrutiny, a commander's eye in steel and glass. Jack adjusted the Leupold Mark 8 scope with methodical precision. Every quarter turn of the turret was deliberate, born of decades spent behind rifles in deserts, jungles, and mountain ranges. The Barrett's recoil, normally a thunderclap to shoulder and chest, was absent. For him today, it was only a lens, a way to see the subtle differences between shooters spread across the range below. The young men and women, clad in desert fatigues, moved with a mixture of confidence and hesitation that marked them as candidates. Recruits for a program most outsiders still didn't believe existed. The Navy SEAL sniper selection course was notorious, but what unfolded here was beyond even that. This was the pipeline that tested not just shooters, but those whose nerves, patience, and minds could bend reality at distance. A man or woman who could reach out across 3 kilometers and place one bullet precisely where it was needed was rare. A man or woman who could do it reliably was nearly myth. Jack exhaled slowly, letting the crosshairs drift from one recruit to another. Most showed the same traits he had seen for years: tense shoulders, wasted movement between shots, eyes betraying calculation rather than instinct. They were good shooters. Some were excellent. But he was not here to see good. He was here to find exceptional. His scope settled on a figure prone behind an Mk-13 rifle, positioned near the far left lane. The shooter was smaller, framed neatly against the desert floor, and her movements were stripped of any excess. She adjusted her bipod legs with the care of a surgeon, not the fumbling uncertainty of most under pressure. When she slid around into the chamber, the motion was smooth, unbroken, practiced to the point of invisibility. Jack leaned closer, studying her through the magnification, tracing every twitch of her hands. Her face, half hidden beneath a tan boonie hat, betrayed little. A dark strand of hair escaped across her cheek as she lowered herself behind the scope. She didn't brush it away. She simply let it fall, her focus unbroken. Through the Barrett's scope, Jack watched the steady rise and fall of her back as she breathed, aligning her body with the rifle's bore like water, settling into the shape of its container. She was young, too young, perhaps, for the aura of calm that seemed to radiate from her posture. Most candidates overthought everything. They checked wind with exaggerated hand signals, tugged at their cheek welds, or glanced nervously at instructors pacing behind them. She did none of this. Her world had shrunk to the target and the rifle. Jack recognized the look instantly. It was the look of someone who had lived with the rifle long enough that it ceased to be a tool. It was an extension. He tracked her scope alignment. She wasn't rushing to engage the nearest target, a broad steel silhouette at 800 meters. Instead, she lay motionless for nearly a full minute, watching, reading. Her muzzle shifted slightly, just a hair, as if following the subtle dance of the wind, tugging dust devils across the ground. Jack smiled faintly. The good shooters saw targets. The great shooters saw air. Below, the instructor called out the next drill. Each candidate would engage sequential targets from 600 to 1,200 meters, with a time limit. It was designed to force mistakes, to strip away calm by inserting urgency. Jack had designed it himself years ago, knowing full well that artificial pressure revealed the truth of a sniper's mind. Any competent marksman could hit steel at distance, when given all the time in the world. But a sniper had no such luxury. The shooters began, the sharp cracks of rifles snapping like distant firecrackers. Impacts rang out on steel, some clean, some wild. Jack shifted to the female shooter again. She had not fired. Time bled away, and others were already halfway through their sequence. An average instructor would assume hesitation. Jack knew better. She was calculating, collecting, banking data for all her shots at once. When her trigger finally broke, the suppressed Mk-13 barked softly, and half a second later, the 600-meter plate clanged. Without hesitation, she cycled the bolt, settled again, and fired at 700. Another clang. Jack's smile grew. She wasn't shooting one plate at a time. She had mapped the entire range in her head before committing to the first shot. Each follow-up was a continuation of the same conversation. 800 fell, then 9, then a clean impact at 1,000. Her cadence never shifted, smooth as breath, devoid of panic or wasted energy. By the time her round smacked against the 1,200-meter steel, half the other candidates were scrambling to correct missed shots. She lowered her rifle, hands calm, expression unchanged. Jack leaned back from the Barrett, studying her without magnification now. Around her, candidates glanced sideways, the unspoken acknowledgement that someone had just changed the standard. Few would admit it aloud, but every one of them had felt the pressure of her precision ripple across the firing line. He scribbled a note in the worn leather-bound book at his side. Nothing dramatic. Just a number, a date, and a single word. Calm. The commander had seen enough careers to know talent when it surfaced, but this was different. Talent was raw, chaotic, requiring years of refinement. This woman's shooting carried no edges, no ragged corners. It was polished in a way that suggested not just practice, but experience earned somewhere beyond training ranges and controlled environments. He frowned, adjusting his cap against the sun. Few reached this course without years of conventional military records to their name, and yet he could not recall seeing hers. As the session ended and instructors called the ceasefire, Jack lingered with his scope on her. She didn't leap up or stretch like the others. She cleared her weapon, checked the chamber, folded her bipod, and only then rose to her knees. Her every action was deliberate, professional, ingrained. She looked less like a candidate under assessment, and more like someone who had already walked the path they were all trying to find. Jack exhaled, lowering the Barrett fully. His jaw set as a thought pressed unbidden into his mind. She reminded him of a story, a ghost of a name whispered among allied sniper communities. A woman, somewhere overseas, credited with a kill that defied the accepted limits of possibility. A shot measured in kilometers, not meters. Officially, the record belonged elsewhere. Unofficially, those who understood the craft spoke of a number. 3,147. Jack shook the memory away, dismissing it as coincidence. But the image lingered as stubbornly as the desert heat. The commander closed the scope caps and rested his hand on the Barrett's receiver, his gaze still locked on the figure disappearing toward the barracks. He had come to evaluate recruits. Instead, he had found a question wrapped in human form, one that demanded an answer. The barracks fell quiet after evening chow, the Nevada desert wrapped in a cooling hush that replaced the harsh wind of daylight. Commander Jack Halvorsen remained in his office, the low hum of the fluorescent light buzzing above as he thumbed through the stack of folders scattered across his desk. Each folder was a life condensed to pages records of service, commendations, medical reports, training scores, photographs clipped to the inside cover. For him, paper told truths that men and women rarely volunteered. The one he sought lay buried beneath the others, marked only with a last name typed in black, bold block letters. Dawson. He slid it free, laying the folder flat on the desk. The beige cardstock bore the familiar wrinkles of a file, transferred too many times between hands that weren't supposed to hold it. Jack's instincts flared. A clean candidate's file was crisp, sequential, filled with predictable milestones, enlistment, boot camp, most training, unit assignments. Dawson's folder already betrayed itself before he had read a single word. The pages inside bulged unevenly, like a story rewritten mid-sentence. He opened it. Basic information stared back at him. Age, 27. Height, 5'8". Weight, 138 pounds. Service branch, United States Marine Corps. That was expected enough. She was one of a handful cross-branch candidates funneled into the program. Jack's eyes drifted to the service record. There were gaps. Large ones. Dawson had enlisted at 19, graduated boot camp at Parris Island, then advanced infantry school at Camp Geiger. From there, the paper trail grew muddy. Deployment to Iraq in 2018, Afghanistan in 2019. Both tours marked only with generic unit numbers and no clear role designation. No platoon-level commander signatures. No mission logs. Jack frowned. These omissions weren't clerical. They were deliberate. He leaned back in his chair, rubbing his temple. Files didn't get sanitized by accident. Either someone high up had decided that certain details were not for open record, or Dawson herself had been shuffled into places where official pens dared not write. The next section drew his attention a line, buried in the commendations portion. Navy and Marine Corps Achievement Medal with Combat V. Rare for someone of her listed rank. Below it, an award for distinguished marksmanship. The phrasing struck him as odd. Citations were usually worded with bureaucratic precision. This one read like a placeholder, as if the true reason for the medal couldn't be spelled out in ink. He flipped the page to the medical history. Jack's gaze sharpened. Notes in clinical shorthand referenced blast overpressure exposure during an unspecified incident, along with hearing threshold shifts and mild TBI evaluation. But the date field was redacted. Black ink slashed across half the line, censoring what might have been her most telling moment. Whoever had signed off on the redaction had stamped it with a clearance code Jack hadn't seen in years, one tied to joint operations far outside standard Marine infantry work. He paused, tapping the eraser end of his pencil against the folder. The recruits outside were trainees, unproven shooters eager to carve their names. Dawson was something else entirely. She carried the silence of someone who had already lived the life the others only imagined. Jack reached for the attached photo, clipped to the inside cover. The image was Regulation Dawson, in uniform, neutral backdrop, unsmiling. Her eyes were steady, direct. Photographs rarely impressed him. This one held him longer than expected. There was a weight behind the gaze, not defiance, not arrogance, but the tempered steel of someone who had endured and endured again, and somehow sharpened instead of breaking. The commander set the photo down and flipped further. A single page stopped him cold. It was stamped with foreign insignia faintly visible through the copy ink. Canadian Joint Task Force 2. Jack blinked, reread it, and muttered under his breath. What the hell was a Marine corporal doing cross-listed with JTF-2 records? The page was half blacked out, entire paragraphs swallowed by censor bars. But a phrase remained. Confirmed engagement minus 3,147 meters. Jack's pulse ticked upward. He whispered the number as though saying it aloud would change the meaning. 3,147. The very number whispered among sniper communities. Half legend, half myth. The shot that supposedly defied the curvature of belief. Officially, it belonged to a Canadian marksman in Iraq. Yet here, in front of him, Dawson's name brushed against that same figure. Coincidence? or a crack in the facade. He rose from his chair, pacing to the window. Outside, the desert night stretched vast and indifferent, the stars sharp and cold above. He had served with snipers who could push the outer edges of 2 kilometers, maybe more, in perfect conditions. But 3,147 wasn't just distance. It was a war fought through physics. At that range, a bullet's flight time was near 10 seconds. The world could shift in 10 seconds. Wind currents could twist unseen. The earth itself rotated beneath the shot. To land such a round wasn't merely skill. It bordered on sorcery. And yet, watching Dawson earlier, he had seen no sorcery, no magic. Only calm, measured execution. The same kind of quiet precision that could explain the unexplainable. Jack sat back down, the file open before him. He skimmed the last section. Psychological evaluations. Notes described her as reserved, highly focused, and displaying unusual tolerance for isolation. Another line read, operates effectively in autonomous conditions for extended periods. Jack almost laughed. That was bureaucratic code for she can vanish into the dirt and wait weeks if necessary. He closed the folder slowly, pressing his hand flat on the cover as if holding down the secrets inside. This wasn't just another candidate. This was someone inserted into his course for a reason not spelled out in briefing packets. He wondered if his superiors had known, or perhaps they expected him to discover it the way he had, through suspicion, through detail, through the unease gnawing at his instincts. A knock rattled his door. One of the instructors leaned in. "Sir, we're ready for tomorrow's long-range qualification brief." Jack nodded absently. "I'll be there in a moment." The door shut. Silence returned. He looked once more at the file. Dawson. Tomorrow, she would fire again. And this time, he would be watching closer, not just through the Barrett's scope, but with the knowledge that somewhere, buried beneath layers of redaction and misdirection, this woman might already hold the record the world attributed to someone else. For now, he slipped the folder into his desk drawer, locking it with a click. The truth would not stay buried forever. And Commander Jack Halvorsen intended to be there when it surfaced. Dawn broke with a sharp edge across the desert. The horizon glowed crimson before fading to pale gold, the Nevada range coming alive under the early sun. Candidates shuffled into their firing positions, rifles slung, rucksacks dragging furrows in the sand. The long-range qualification was notorious, stretching targets out past 2,000 meters. For most, it was the limit of belief. For a few, it was where reputations were made. Commander Jack Halvorsen stood at the observation platform again, the Barrett M107A1 balanced on its bipod before him. Through its scope, he scanned the firing line. Dawson was there, calm as ever, her movements unhurried. Where others chattered in nervous tones, checked bolts and magazines twice, she simply unfolded her mat, laid prone, and began the quiet ritual of preparation. The instructors barked instructions. Today's sequence runs 1,000 to 2,200 meters. 10 shots timed. Wind calls will be announced every 3 minutes, but conditions are yours to read. Fail to adjust, fail the drill. It was simple in design, brutal in execution. At those ranges, even slight miscalculations sent rounds wide by meters. The desert heat played tricks, creating mirages that bent light and distorted targets. Jack fixed Dawson in his scope. Her rifle today was a Mk-22 advanced sniper rifle, chambered in .338 Norma Magnum, fitted with a suppressor and a long-range optic. He knew the weapon well, accurate, powerful, but still subject to the merciless mathematics of distance. He waited to see how she would bend those rules. The first volley echoed down the line. Cracks rolled across the desert, the distinctive thump of supersonic rounds punching into steel sometimes. At 1,000 meters, hits were common. At 1,400, they grew rarer. By 1,600, even strong shooters began to fall apart. Jack watched Dawson. She had not fired. Her cheek rested against the stock, her finger laid across the trigger guard, her eye fixed through the scope. He recognized the stillness from the day before patience weaponized. She was not in a hurry to please anyone with quick impacts. She was building her map. Finally, her trigger broke. The suppressed crack barely registered compared to others, but half a second later, the 1,000-meter plate rang clean. Without pause, she cycled the bolt, adjusted, and sent another round. The 1,200-meter plate rocked. She was skipping the sequence. She wasn't proving she could hit. She was proving she could dominate. By the time others scrambled through their third or fourth target, Dawson had walked her way calmly to 1,600, then 1,800. Each impact rang with surgical precision. Jack leaned into the Barrett, his jaw tightening. He'd seen elite shooters run the course, but her cadence was unnerving, not hurried, not cautious, simply inevitable. At 2,000 meters, most rounds from the other candidates smacked into dirt or disappeared into silence. Dawson's first shot missed, just wide left, the dust plume faint in the morning glare. She didn't flinch. She adjusted 2 clicks, breathed, fired again. This time, the plate answered with a hard metallic clang. Jack muttered under his breath. She's walking it in like it's nothing. At 2,200 meters, the instructors leaned forward. Few ever landed hits there. It was the outer edge of what the range was designed for. Dawson adjusted again, waded through a gust of wind, and squeezed. A bullet sailed, its flight time an eternity. Silence hung over the line until clang. The plate trembled. The instructors erupted with quiet exclamations. Jack remained still, though his pulse thudded harder. But Dawson wasn't done. She cycled the bolt, sent another round. Clang again. 2 hits at 2,200, back to back, with the calmness of someone ordering breakfast. Jack lowered his head slightly, exhaling through his nose. This wasn't training anymore. This was demonstration. A message, intentional or not, that she was not like the others. The ceasefire was called. Candidates rolled onto their backs, groaning, stretching cramped shoulders. Some wore the defeated looks of shooters who had just discovered their limits. Dawson simply cleared her rifle, folded her bipod, and remained prone, staring at the range as though still calculating. Jack closed the Barrett's scope caps and stood, his boots grinding against the platform. He descended the tower, his broad frame cutting through the dust as he made his way to the line. The instructors snapped to attention as he approached. He waved them off and stopped at Dawson's lane. She looked up at him, eyes steady, face neutral. Sweat streaked across her brow, but her breathing was even, unlabored. Her rifle lay across her mat, already cleared and safe. "Corporal Dawson," Jack said evenly. "Sir, you skipped the sequence." "Yes, sir." "Why?" Her answer came without hesitation. The conditions favored range over rhythm. It was efficient to stack data front to back rather than piece by piece. Jack studied her, the corners of his mouth twitching at the clinical phrasing. Efficient. Most shooters talked in terms of luck, of gut feeling. She spoke like a machine. And the 2,200? He pressed. She held his gaze. It was there to be hit. Jack felt the weight of her words. Simple, unadorned, but they carried a certainty that unsettled him. He nodded once, turned, and walked back up the line. Behind him, Dawson remained prone, unmoving, as though she had said all she needed. Back at the platform, Jack leaned on the railing, staring out at the shimmering desert. He could no longer ignore the thought clawing at the back of his mind. The dossier hadn't lied. Whoever she was, whatever past had been scrubbed from those papers, Dawson was already operating at a level few alive could match. He tapped his fingers against the Barrett's receiver, the rhythm of old habit returning. The number came back again, uninvited. 3,147 meters. He whispered it to himself, almost a prayer, almost a curse. And for the first time in years, Commander Jack Halvorsen felt the electric hum of anticipation. He had not just found a candidate. He had found a story waiting to be told, and a truth waiting to be proven. Night draped the Nevada desert in silence, the range abandoned to the whine of cicadas and the occasional bark of a coyote. Inside his office, Commander Jack Halvorsen sat hunched over the glow of his laptop, the room otherwise dark. A mug of stale coffee, cooled at his elbow, ignored. His hands moved slowly across the keys, methodical, careful, as he probed databases not meant for casual browsing. Dawson's file had been gnawing at him since the previous morning. The numbers, the redactions, the improbable calm with which she had bent the long-range course to her will, it all formed a knot in his mind. He had seen great shooters before, prodigies even, but she was something else entirely. He tapped into the Joint Special Operations Command archive. Years of clearance afforded him threads others couldn't reach, though even here, locked behind digital walls, much was denied him. Yet whispers remained. Scattered reports, fragments of logs, mission after action summaries with names cut away, but contexts intact. Iraq, Mosul, Northern Afghanistan. Joint operations with Canadian JTF-2. The number appeared again. 3,147 meters. Not tied to her name, not directly. But there, embedded in footnotes, rumors written into otherwise sterile documents. A shot fired from a concealed overwatch, wind velocity charted, ballistic computer notes copied. The engagement ended with one man dead, a high-value insurgent commander who had eluded capture for years. Official credit went to another name, one enshrined in sniper lore. But something about the phrasing felt deliberate, as if the true story had been buried under an acceptable truth. Jack leaned back, rubbing his temples. In his world, myth always grew around facts. He had told young snipers the story of that shot himself, years ago, half believing the legend. To now see Dawson sitting in his course, quietly dismantling every benchmark, was like staring at a ghost he had once thought fictional. A knock at the door broke his focus. "Enter," he called. Chief Petty Officer Ramirez stepped in, a broad-shouldered veteran with a face carved by sun and salt. He dropped a folder on the desk. "Candidate performance summary, sir." "Thought you'd want the preliminaries." Jack opened it. Scores lined the pages: marksmanship, endurance, mental resilience. Dawson's numbers sat cleanly at the top. Not perfect, never ostentatious, but consistently superior. She wasn't chasing the spotlight. She was simply outpacing everyone without breaking stride. Ramirez grunted. "The others are starting to notice. Won't say it out loud, but you can feel it on the line. Some are rattled." Jack closed the folder. "And Dawson? Doesn't seem to care. Doesn't socialize. Doesn't flinch. Hell, half the time I wonder if she's even aware the others are watching." Jack offered a thin smile. "Oh, she's aware." Ramirez raised an eyebrow. "You think she's been through this before?" Jack didn't answer directly. He tapped the file with one finger. "I think she's been through something that makes this look like a weekend retreat." When Ramirez left, Jack turned back to the laptop. His instincts screamed at him to press further, to dig until the truth spilled free. But another part of him, the part seasoned by decades of classified operations, whispered caution. Sometimes truths were buried, not because they were lies, but because the world wasn't ready to carry their weight. Still, he couldn't let it go. The next day brought heat waves shimmering across the desert once more. The candidates assembled for endurance trials, rock marches, obstacle navigation, timed sprints under load. Dawson carried her pack with mechanical steadiness, her face unreadable as the sun punished them all. Others staggered, cursed, vomited in the dust. She kept moving, stride unbroken, as though her body had long ago made peace with suffering. Jack observed from a distance, flanked by instructors jotting notes. His eyes never left her. The other recruits noticed too. He saw it in the sideways glances, the muttered curses, the resentment brewing in silence. During the evening debrief, the tension cracked. One of the candidates, a broad-shouldered Army Ranger named Kovacs, spoke louder than intended. "Sir, I don't know why we're even here if some people are just plants." The room went still. Jack's gaze cut across the table. Dawson sat at the far end, her expression unchanged, eyes lowered to the notes before her. She didn't rise to the bait, didn't even acknowledge it. Jack let the silence linger until Kovacs shifted uncomfortably. Then he spoke, his voice measured. "Every candidate here earns their place. No exceptions." Kovacs looked as though he might argue further, but one glance at Jack ended it. The ranger sank back in his chair. Dawson never lifted her eyes. When the debrief ended, Jack dismissed the room but lingered. He watched Dawson gather her materials, her movements deliberate, unhurried. As she passed him at the doorway, he spoke quietly. "Walk with me." She followed him into the desert air, the sky overhead painted in streaks of orange and violet. They walked in silence for several minutes, the gravel crunching beneath their boots. Finally, Jack stopped near the edge of the range. "You've been holding back," he said. Dawson regarded him evenly. "I've been performing within the parameters, sir. That's not what I mean." He turned, meeting her gaze. "I know about the number. 3,147. For the first time, her composure flickered. Not much, just a fraction, a shadow across her expression, but enough. Jack continued. "The world thinks it belongs to someone else. Officially, maybe it does. But I've been around long enough to read between the lines." She said nothing, her eyes fixed on the horizon. He took a step closer. "You're not here just to qualify. You're here because someone wants me to see what you're capable of. To recognize it. To prepare for something." Her jaw tightened. "With respect, sir, my past is not the course. What matters is whether I can perform here." Jack studied her in the fading light. She wasn't denying it. She was deflecting, protecting something larger than herself. He nodded slowly. "Very well. Perform here, then. But understand this, if you are what I think you are, this course won't be your final test. Something bigger is coming. And when it does, you won't be able to hide behind silence." She inclined her head, a gesture of acknowledgement, without agreement. Then she turned and walked back toward the barracks, her silhouette swallowed by the darkening desert. Jack remained where he stood, the wind tugging at his sleeves. His suspicions were no longer suspicions. They were truths unspoken, truths that carried consequences. Dawson wasn't just a candidate. She was the future of a craft, a living contradiction to boundaries men like him had once believed unbreakable. And as the stars pricked the sky above, Commander Jack Halvorsen felt the weight of command heavier than ever. Because he knew her presence here was not coincidence. It was the opening move of something far greater. The desert mornings carried a particular chill, a brief reprieve before the sun rose high enough to scorch the sand. Commander Jack Halvorsen sat in the mess hall with a paper cup of black coffee, its surface swirling as he stirred absent-mindedly. Around him, candidates ate in silence, exhausted from the previous day's trials. Trays clattered, boots scuffed, the usual rhythm of bodies pushed near breaking. But beneath it all, Jack felt the shift, an invisible weight pressing on the room. The shift had a name, Dawson. She sat alone at the far table, posture straight, head bowed over her oatmeal. She didn't glance up, didn't acknowledge the others, didn't need to. The silence around her was a moat. Some recruits stared at her openly, some avoided looking altogether. Even without a word spoken, her performance on the range had carved a canyon between her and everyone else. Jack drank deeply, letting the bitterness settle his nerves. He'd seen units unravel before, jealousy turning to resentment, resentment turning to fractures. Yet Dawson didn't seem to notice or care. Ramirez slid into the seat across from him. "You've seen the reports?" Jack frowned. "Which ones?" "Came in last night. Intel Cell ran a deeper scrub after your request." Ramirez handed over a sealed folder. "I shouldn't even have this, sir." "But you asked." Jack took it, the weight in his hands almost physical. The folder was thinner than he expected, but weight wasn't measured in pages. It was measured in what those pages contained. He cracked the seal and began to read. The first sheet was stamped with the red slash of classified. Beneath, a briefing summary. Operation Iron Crescent. Iraq, 2019. Coalition forces partnered with Canadian JTF-2 and select marine assets. Engagement of high-value target at extreme range. Jack's pulse quickened. His eyes skimmed the page. There it was. Confirmed kill distance, 3,147 meters. The report attributed the shot to a Canadian sniper, name redacted, but handwritten in the margin, in ink from someone who hadn't intended for this copy to leave its filing cabinet, were two words, Actual Shooter Dawson. Jack exhaled sharply, his grip tightening on the folder. The pieces locked together. The redactions in her file, the cross-branch assignment, the silence she carried like armor. It was real. She had done it. The shot wasn't legend, wasn't myth. It was fact, and the shooter now sat 20 feet away, quietly finishing her oatmeal. He read further. The notes described her position rooftop of an abandoned apartment block, Mosul outskirts. Spotter unavailable due to injury. Dawson had calculated alone. No wind call corrections fed to her, no one adjusting her scope. 10 seconds of bullet flight. 10 seconds where the world could have betrayed her. Yet when the round struck, the insurgent commander had dropped mid-sentence, killed instantly. Jack closed the folder slowly, his throat tight. Ramirez studied him. "So it's true?" Jack nodded once. "It's true." Ramirez leaned back, whistling under his breath. "Christ, and they buried it." "Of course they buried it," Jack said. "Too many politics, too much heat. Easier to credit someone else. Clean narrative." He glanced toward Dawson. "And she let them." Ramirez followed his gaze. "Why?" Jack didn't answer immediately. He thought of her silence, her refusal to rise when provoked, her calm that bordered on otherworldly. Finally, he said, maybe because she never cared who got the credit. Maybe because surviving it was enough. The breakfast hour ended, and the candidates filed out to the day's drills. Jack stayed behind, the folder still beneath his hand. The revelation burned in his mind, not just as a piece of history uncovered, but as a question. Why was she here now? What game was being played above his head? That afternoon, the recruits were pushed into a team exercise simulated Overwatch in staggered pairs, one acting as shooter, the other as spotter. It was meant to test cooperation, communication, and trust. Jack observed from the ridge as pairs crawled into position across rocky outcroppings, scanning for mock targets scattered across the range. Dawson had been paired with Kovacs, the ranger who had mouthed it off during debrief. Jack almost pitied him. Almost. From the start, the imbalance was clear. Kovacs barked adjustments, his voice sharp with frustration. 2 mils left. No, damn it. I said 2, Not one. Dawson made the correction silently, fired, and rang steel. Kovacs blinked, thrown by her unflinching precision. He tried again, flustered. Hold higher. You're gonna miss. She ignored him, read the wind herself, and hit clean. The exercise was supposed to last 30 minutes. Dawson dismantled it in 15. Targets that had taken other pairs half a dozen corrections were downed in single shots. Kovacs, red-faced and muttering, eventually fell silent, realizing he was little more than ballast. Jack noted every detail, every interaction. It wasn't just her skill, it was her presence. She shifted the balance of the exercise itself. The others weren't just competing against her. They were measuring themselves against a standard they hadn't thought humanly possible. And most were finding themselves lacking. When the ceasefire was called, Dawson cleared her rifle, stood, and slung it across her shoulder. Kovacs glared at her, pride wounded beyond repair. You think you're better than the rest of us? He spat. She looked at him calmly, voice steady. No, I know what I am. And it has nothing to do with you. Jack caught the exchange from the ridge, the words carrying in the dry air. He saw the flicker of anger on Kovacs' face, but also the quiet awe in the eyes of others nearby. The truth was out now, not the classified file, not the whispered number, but the undeniable fact that Dawson operated on a level none of them could touch. That night, back in his office, Jack placed the classified folder in his drawer, locking it with deliberate care. He sat back in his chair, staring at the ceiling. He should have felt satisfaction, having uncovered the truth. Instead, he felt unease, because truth demanded action, and the truth about Dawson was too large to keep contained. If she had carried the world's most impossible shot on her shoulders in silence, what else was she capable of? Jack closed his eyes, Dawson's words echoing in his head. I know what I am. He believed her, and the thought both comforted and terrified him. The barracks carried a strange quiet in the days following the exercise. Conversations hushed when Dawson walked past, not out of malice anymore, but because words seemed too small in her presence. Recruits who once scoffed at the idea of training alongside a woman now measured their tone, watching her with a mix of curiosity and something like reverence. Commander Jack Halvorsen noticed it everywhere. At Chow, Dawson no longer ate alone, though she remained silent. Recruits gathered within her orbit, pretending it was coincidence. In the gym, lifters paused to glance her way, as if expecting her to outdo them without even trying. The atmosphere had shifted, less resistance and more recalibration. Respect, Jack thought, was a funny thing. It never announced itself. It crept in quietly, replacing doubt and ridicule until even the skeptics had no ground left to stand on. One evening, during weapons maintenance, the shift became undeniable. The recruits sat around the benches, stripped rifles spread like surgical instruments. Dawson worked in silence, cloth moving over her Barrett's long barrel, movements methodical. Kovacs, still smarting from being shown up, muttered something under his breath. Weeks earlier, the room would have echoed with laughter, shoulders bumping, cheap shots piled on. This time, no one laughed. Instead, Nguyen, a Marine scout sniper, leaned forward and asked Dawson a direct question. What's your wind call method at range? Dawson paused, looked at him, then answered simply. I break it into sectors. Closest terrain, mid, far. I average the shifts, weight them against mirage. Trust the math, then confirm with instinct. Nguyen nodded, his expression sober. That's what I figured. But the way you shoot your instinct must be something else. It was the closest thing to public acknowledgement anyone had given her. For a moment, silence filled the room again, but it wasn't uncomfortable. It was respect, crystallizing in the open. Jack, who had been standing near the doorway, caught the shift in their posture. Shoulders relaxed, heads turned toward Dawson, listening now instead of dismissing. She didn't boast, didn't lecture. She spoke in clipped sentences, precise, almost reluctant to share. But they leaned in anyway, soaking it up. By the end of the night, when the rifles gleamed under fluorescent light, it was clear. Dawson was no longer just one of them. She was something more, something unspoken. A standard to reach for, even if unreachable. The next day, Jack decided to test the fragile new equilibrium. He organized a stress shoot designed to break cohesion and reveal cracks under pressure. Weighted packs, sprints under the sun, and immediate transitions to precision fire. Candidates stumbled, cursed, struggled to steady their sights. Heartbeats spiked, sweat stung eyes, and discipline faltered. Dawson did not falter. She moved like a machine calibrated for chaos. Pack dropped, rifle up, shot clean. Sprint again, fire again. While others fought to manage their breathing, she seemed to absorb the strain and channel it into sharper control. By the fourth cycle, the recruits stopped comparing themselves to one another. They compared themselves to her. Jack watched carefully, noting how the respect grew not just from her results, but from her refusal to grandstand. When Ramirez tallied scores at the end, Dawson sat quietly on the dirt, helmet resting on her knees, gaze distant. She didn't smile, didn't seek approval. She existed in her own current, detached from the need for recognition. Nguyen approached her afterward. "You know," he said, his voice carrying a mix of humility and challenge, "you're making the rest of us look bad." Dawson tilted her head, eyes narrowing. "Or better." Nguyen considered this, then nodded. Fair point. Word traveled faster than any official report. Within days, whispers became open discussion. Instructors overheard recruits debating the details of her supposed past, fragments of truth blending with rumor. Some claimed she had taken the 3,147-meter shot alone in a sandstorm. Others insisted she'd been part of a secret unit that never officially existed. The specifics hardly mattered. What mattered was that the number stuck 3,147. It carried weight, the kind of number that hung in the air like scripture. Even Kovacs, who had been her loudest detractor, fell silent. He avoided her now, unwilling to challenge the unshakable ground beneath her reputation. Jack watched him carefully, wary of festering pride turning toxic, but so far Kovacs seemed more cowed than dangerous. For Jack, the shift among the recruits was both a relief and a complication. Respect was valuable. It fostered cohesion, discipline, belief. But unchecked, it could turn into something else. Hero worship. And hero worship was dangerous. Soldiers who believed one person could not fail often followed blindly, abandoning their own judgment. So he kept Dawson close, observing her with the same scrutiny he had from the beginning. She unsettled him, not because of her skill, though that was unsettling enough, but because of the quiet certainty she carried. She wasn't trying to be their leader, wasn't trying to inspire. She simply existed as she was, and that was enough to bend the current around her. One night, after lights out, Jack found himself unable to sleep. He stepped outside into the desert air, cool and thin, stars scattered like shrapnel across the sky. To his surprise, Dawson was already there, sitting on the steps, rifle disassembled beside her. She looked up briefly as he approached, and returned to cleaning the bolt carrier. "You don't sleep much," Jack said. "Not when I can work," she replied, her tone flat but not unfriendly. Jack studied her for a long moment. "They're starting to respect you. You know that?" Her hands didn't pause. "Respect doesn't matter. Consistency does. Respect comes and goes." "That's true," Jack admitted. "But you've shifted the way they think. That matters more than you realize." Dawson finally looked at him, her eyes reflecting faint starlight. "I didn't come here to shift anyone's thinking, Commander. I came here to prove something to myself." Jack nodded slowly. He didn't press further. Whatever she carried, it wasn't something she was ready to put into words. But he understood the weight of ghosts, the way they drove men and women to push further than reason allowed. As the weeks wore on, Dawson's presence hardened into something immovable within the unit. When she spoke, people listened. When she moved, they adjusted unconsciously to her rhythm. Respect had moved past whispers. It had become the foundation of how the recruits functioned. And though Jack would never say it aloud, even he felt it. The weight of watching someone who had accomplished the impossible, who had touched the farthest edge of what humans could do, and carried it with quiet dignity. He reminded himself constantly, she was still human. She could still bleed, still break. But in the silence of his own thoughts, Jack admitted a truth he didn't dare voice. If anyone could redefine what impossible meant, it was Dawson. The desert range looked different under floodlights. Shadows stretched long, flickering with each gust of wind. The recruits stood in formation, sweat already darkening their fatigues, though the night was cool. The smell of cordite and sand clung to the air, the taste of iron lingering in the throat. Commander Jack Halvorsen paced in front of them, boots grinding gravel, his voice sharp against the hum of generators. "Tonight, you'll run an integrated exercise. Live rounds. Coordinated movement. Overwatch, assault, and extraction. You'll succeed as a unit or fail as one. There are no individual scores. Only survival." He let the words sink in. Faces hardened, jaws clenched. They had run drills before, but never one structured like this. Tonight's scenario was designed to mimic a real-world raid. Multiple objectives, shifting roles, and no margin for error. Jack's gaze drifted to Dawson. She stood at ease, eyes steady, expression unreadable. She hadn't asked questions during the briefing, hadn't flinched at the details. If the others were nervous, she was a stone. The recruits broke into squads. Dawson was slotted as Overwatch lead, partnered with Nguyen. Jack had chosen the pairing deliberately. Nguyen respected her skill, but still carried his own pride enough to test whether he would follow her lead under fire. The mission began with a timed infiltration across open ground. Packs weighed heavy, rifles jostled against shoulders, boots sank into sand. Dawson and Nguyen broke off first, climbing the ridge to secure high ground. The rest pushed forward, moving in staggered teams, their shapes blending into the desert night. From the ridge, Dawson scanned the valley. Steel silhouettes marked enemy positions, their edges glinting faintly under floodlights. Heat shimmered from distant barrels, meant to simulate muzzle flashes. She raised her Barrett, adjusted for wind, and breathed out. "Target's left flank," she murmured. Nguyen confirmed, spotting scope tracking. "Copy, range 850. Dawson's finger tightened. The Barrett roared, recoil slamming her shoulder. Downrange, a steel silhouette rang and fell. Another followed, then another, her rhythm steady, unhurried. The assault team advanced under the cover of her fire, trusting the unseen shield she provided. Then came the twist. Midway through the push, an unexpected set of targets lit up on the right flank. Jack had ordered the change last minute, shifting the scenario into chaos. The recruits froze, caught between their planned advance and sudden new fire lanes. Shouts cut across the comms, confusion threatening to unravel coordination. Dawson didn't hesitate. "Shift right. I'll cover." Nguyen swiveled, spotting scope swinging. "That's a long angle. Not longer than necessary," Dawson said calmly. She dialed her scope, adjusted elevation, and fired. The first steel target dropped. She shifted, fired again, her corrections instantaneous. The recruits below saw the path clear and moved. But then a misstep. Kovacs, still bristling with resentment, broke formation, rushing ahead without cover. A simulated machine gun nest lit up, rounds cracking the air. He dropped flat, pinned, the assault line stalling. Panic rippled through the squad. Nguyen swore. "We can't cover them all." Dawson's voice remained level. "We don't need to." "Just him," she adjusted, breath steady. The Barrett thundered. Sparks erupted from the steel nest, the target falling with a metallic scream. Kovacs scrambled back into formation, shame written in every frantic movement. The squad reformed, momentum restored. From his vantage point, Jack watched every second. His heart pounded not from fear, but from recognition. This was the moment he had been waiting for. Dawson wasn't just shooting. She was commanding. Her calm voice steadied the squad more than any instructor's order could. The mission pressed on. Breach charges blew open lock doors. Recruits cleared rooms with precision, and Dawson tracked them from above, her rifle singing a brutal song of protection. Each shot was a promise. "Move forward, I've got you." By the time the extraction phase began, exhaustion draped over the recruits like chains. Packs dug into shoulders, knees buckled, sweat stung eyes. But their movements were sharper, more synchronized than ever before. They had been forged in chaos, tempered by trust. When the final ceasefire whistle blew, silence hung heavy. The recruits stood in the valley, chest heaving, weapons limp at their sides. Dawson and Nguyen descended from the ridge, their rifles slung, boots crunching in the dirt. Jack stepped forward, hands clasped behind his back. He looked at them, not just Dawson, but all of them. He saw the fatigue, the rawness, the fear burned out and replaced with something harder. "You didn't break," he said simply. "Not because of luck. Not because of chance. You didn't break because you trusted each other." His eyes lingered on Dawson. She met his gaze, her expression unchanged, but he saw the truth reflected in the squad around her. Nguyen nodded to her quietly. Others glanced her way, not with envy, but with acknowledgement. Even Kovacs, still flushed with humiliation, kept his eyes lowered in grudging respect. Later, in the debrief, Jack pulled Dawson aside. The recruits filed out, leaving the two of them alone in the stark-lit room. "You studied them," Jack said. She didn't answer immediately. She leaned her Barrett against the wall, folded her arms, and tilted her head slightly. "They steadied themselves." Jack smiled faintly. "Don't play modest. You were the voice they followed." Her jaw tightened. "Voices can be silenced. Skill can't." Jack studied her carefully, noting the edge in her tone. She wasn't fishing for praise. She wasn't even comfortable being singled out. For Dawson, leadership wasn't about commanding. It was about doing, proving, surviving. The rest followed because they couldn't do otherwise. As she moved to leave, Jack said one more thing. "You may not want it, Dawson, but you've earned their trust. And whether you like it or not, that makes you a leader." She paused at the door, her silhouette framed by the harsh light. For a moment, Jack thought she might argue. Instead, she said quietly, "Leaders die first." Then she walked out. Jack remained alone, the weight of her words pressing down. He knew she was right. He also knew that if war demanded it, she'd walk into the fire first, and every one of them would follow. The desert lay silent after the final exercise. The floodlights had been switched off, and the range returned to its natural state, cold, vast, indifferent. The recruits moved like shadows toward the barracks, their laughter muted, but genuine for the first time since training began. They had been tested, and they had survived. Commander Jack Halvorsen lingered on the ridge, hands in his pockets, eyes scanning the horizon. He had seen hundreds of classes cycle through over the years, Men broken down and remade. Women pushing themselves beyond the limits others had set for them. But this was different. Dawson stood apart from the others, her Barrett slung across her back, posture relaxed yet somehow alert. She wasn't celebrating, wasn't soaking in the camaraderie of the moment. She was quiet, as always, her gaze fixed on the horizon, as though she were waiting for something the desert could never provide. Jack walked toward her, boots crunching on gravel. She didn't turn when he stopped beside her. For a moment, they stood in silence, two figures outlined against the starlit sky. "You changed them," Jack said finally. Dawson's eyes didn't leave the horizon. "They changed themselves. I was just there." Jack gave a dry chuckle. "You keep saying that. But I watched them tonight. Watched them lean into your voice, trust your judgment. They didn't just follow orders. They believed." She shifted slightly, adjusting the strap of her rifle. "Belief is dangerous. It can blind men faster than fear." "True," Jack agreed. "But it can also keep them moving when everything else fails." For the first time, Dawson looked at him directly. Her eyes were sharp, unflinching, the eyes of someone who had measured the cost of belief too many times to romanticize it. "You want me to be something I'm not, Commander?" Jack held her gaze. "No, I want you to be exactly what you are. And what you are, whether you admit it or not, is the standard now. They'll measure themselves against you. They'll remember you long after this program ends." She was silent for a long time, the wind tugging at loose strands of her hair. Finally, she said softly, "The standard gets people killed. They'll chase it, and some won't reach it. That's always been true," Jack said. "But without a standard, they chase nothing at all." The recruits' laughter drifted back to them, a reminder of the fragile humanity that training tried so hard to strip away. Jack wondered how many of them would make it through deployments, how many would carry scars visible and invisible. He wondered, too, how many would remember Dawson not as a legend, but as the steady presence who showed them what was possible. Later, in the debriefing hall, Jack stood before the assembled recruits. They sat straighter than usual, their faces marked by exhaustion, but lit with something hard to resolve. He looked at each of them before speaking. "You came here as individuals. Tonight, you leave as a unit. You trusted each other when it mattered. You learned that strength isn't measured in who shouts the loudest or who lifts the most. It's measured in who stands steady when everything else falls apart." His eyes flicked briefly to Dawson, but he didn't linger. He didn't need to. They all knew. "Carry that forward," he said. "Because out there, the enemy won't care how strong you think you are. They'll only care how strong you are together." The recruits filed out after dismissal, their boots echoing against the concrete. Dawson lingered at the back, as though reluctant to leave. When she finally stepped past him, Jack spoke quietly. "They'll remember this. They'll remember you." She stopped, half-turned, and shook her head. "They shouldn't remember me. They should remember what they did." Jack almost argued, but stopped himself. She wasn't wrong. She had no interest in fame, no hunger for recognition. Her past proved that she had let someone else's name be attached to the record shot without protest. For her, the mission had always outweighed the story. Days later, when the class disbanded and the recruits were reassigned to their next phases, Jack stood in his office with the folder he had locked away weeks before. He opened it one last time, staring at the redacted lines, the stamped classification, the scribbled note that revealed the truth. Actual shooter Dawson. He thought about shredding it, erasing the trail as thoroughly as the system had tried to. But he didn't. Instead, he closed it carefully, returned it to the drawer, and locked it again. Some truths didn't need to be shouted. Some only needed to be preserved. Outside, the sun was rising, painting the desert in bands of gold and crimson. Jack watched the light spill across the training grounds, where so much had been tested and revealed. He thought about the recruits Nguyen, who had learned humility through respect. Kovacs, who had tasted the sting of pride but survived it. The others, each of them reshaped by the shadow of one woman's steady presence. And he thought about Dawson walking into the horizon with the quiet certainty of someone who didn't need applause to know her worth. For the rest of his career, Jack would carry the memory of watching her through the Barrett .5, that first day. How he had studied her with suspicion, trying to uncover her flaw. And how, instead, he had uncovered the story of a soldier who had already achieved the impossible, and who carried that burden with silence instead of arrogance. The legend of the 3,147-meter shot would continue to circle in whispers and rumors, half believed, half doubted. But Jack knew the truth. He had seen it in her eyes, in her steadiness under fire, in the way others had transformed simply by being near her. She wasn't just another recruit. She wasn't even just a record holder. She was proof that the standard could be pushed further than anyone thought possible. And in the quiet spaces between battles, when commanders like Jack questioned whether the next generation could endure what lay ahead, he would remember Dawson. He would remember the way she had changed a room without speaking, the way she had steadied a unit without claiming command, the way she had proven that strength wasn't in noise, but in silence. Dawson would never call herself a leader, but she was. And leaders, Jack knew, didn't need monuments or medals to matter. They just needed to exist at the right moment, in the right place, to remind everyone else that impossible was only a word.